Well, thank you all tonight, and thanks for joining for the for this there. The Honorable Randy Pettipies and dear members of the Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association and valued guests, welcome to the first of 2 evenings of OMSPA Information Zoom meetings. The topics of these meetings should be of high interest and value to members, as they have been chosen based upon a member's input. First, I would like to offer you a few thoughts as your president, and before I formally introduce our first guest speaker. Jules?
Bonjour tout le monde, ainsi que notre invité d'honneur, M. Randy Pettipies, ainsi que nos membres de l'Association des acériculteurs de l'Ontario, ainsi que d'autres invités présents ce soir. Nous vous souhaitons la bienvenue à la première des 2 soirées de rencontre que nous avons pour l'information de l'OMSPA. Le sujet d'information de ces réunions devrait être d'un grand intérêt et de grande valeur pour les membres, car ils ont été choisis en fonction des commentaires et suggestions de nos membres. En tant que président, Frank Hirkins aimerait vous offrir quelques réflexions avant d'introduire notre premier conférencier. Back to you, Frank.
Thank you, Jules, for that. Welcome to our second all-members virtual info days. The event was such a success last year, we decided to do it again. I will keep my thoughts short, as you hear from me every month, sometimes twice a month, and you may wonder when I'm ever going to run out of ideas or things to say. It's been 13 months since I've taken over the presidency, and a lot of things have happened in the last year. And I would just like to update you on a few things for those who have not had a chance to hear some of the news over the last year. At the executive level, Leanne Thompson from Lanark, and Leanne's there, wave Leanne, just wave, there she is, from Lanark and District, has taken over the committee chair for marketing and promotion. Leanne's duties already included Maple Weekend and Fall in Love with Maple. So we just added just a little bit more to her plate, but I promise not to overfill it. Leanne and her committees have done a fabulous job with limited funding to create 2 world-class events in the province of Ontario. Maple Weekend Committee are looking forward to the first weekend in April of 2022 to hold the event within provincial COVID guidelines. Jules Rochon from Eastern is head of the IT Communications Committee. Jules has been instrumental in beefing up our computer system software and at the same time establishing web pages for all 11 locals. And he's always checking to make sure that the locals keep their web pages up to date. Steve Needham has moved from marketing promotion to start his new career as a head of a chat group. It'll be called Boiling It Down with Steve Needham. Steve and his committee members will be holding a chat group on Facebook. This group is specifically designed to answer questions for new and small maple producers. Steve also has a forestry specialist on his group, so any questions about forestry, maple syrup, and any other real items related to the maple syrup industry can be asked through this group. Good luck, Steve. The Buddy Sap research is continuing through the RTTC committee. The research committee has fallen short of its funding commitments last year, so we have reached out to the general membership for donations. The Buddy Syrup Tree that shows up in our e-letter every month has a goal of $10,000 in donations. At this point, we are at $8,900 and counting. So please help us reach our goal. Phil Thomas, the committee chair, would love to hear from you. At this point, I would like to talk about our Ontario Maple Products Sector Development and Strategic Plan Working Group, headed up by the Governance Committee and its chair, Randall Goodfell, with 1 L. I will repeat this a number of times for the next couple of months to a point where you'll start dreaming about it or talking about it in those long nights in the sugar house. All 10 working groups are up and running. Some are near completion, some are just starting. Phase 1 will be completed by April the 30th. But in order to complete, we need you the members, you the producers, to answer all the surveys and questions that will be asked of you. Remember, all personal information is kept confidential. So please help your working group members. They need you. We have approximately 60 members which is 10% of our organization, and guests working in 10 high-level groups to produce high-level information that we can share with OMAFRA, producers, and other organizations. We will become the best in the industry. The information will shape the Ontario maple syrup industry for the next 15 years. At this point, I would like to end my report on a very positive note. And I would like to announce the winner of the $500 PV Mart card. Cheryl Whiteman, can you put your video on for a second, please? Cheryl's on there somewhere. There she is. There's Cheryl. So the $500 PV Mart card is given to members that renew their membership before January the 31st and are eligible for the draw. So the grand winner of the PV Mart card is from Eastern Ontario, the brother and sister team of Jim and Cheryl Whiteman. So Cheryl, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I know where you live, so I'll be around. We'll go over the PV Mart there next week. So, so Cheryl, congratulations again. And I won't let Jim know, so you can keep his half also.
Okay.
You didn't have your thumb on the scales, did you there, Frank?
I might have a little bit. So again, thank you very much. I promise to keep my report short tonight because it's more important that I would like to now formally introduce our first guest speaker, the Honorable Randy Pettipies, who is the MPP for Perth Wellington and served as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs to the Honorable Lisa Thompson. In this role, he puts his agricultural background to good use. Among his many parliamentary accomplishments, he has passed 3 resolutions with all party support to bridge the rural and urban divide, and additionally, a resolution to approve rural health care services. Before his election to Queen's Park in 2011, Randy served as a councillor in the municipality of North Perth. He was re-elected as MPP in 2014 and again in 2018. Randy and his wife Jane live in Listowel. They are proud parents and grandparents. Randy, we appreciate you here tonight, and please give us the good news.
Oh, was I supposed to have some? Okay. Well, thanks, Frank, and I want to thank you for your invitation to speak at this year's Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association Annual General Meeting. And I'm pleased to be here to bring greetings on behalf of the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, Lisa Thompson. You know, there's no denying the fact that maple syrup is one of our country's favorite sweet treats to enjoy throughout the year. We keep a jug in our fridge all the time, and there's at nights I put some toast, I make some toast and put probably too much butter on it and pour some maple syrup on it before I go to bed, and I really enjoy that, and it's something that I've done for a number of years. I want to start by recognizing that it's been a tough year for producers, but with COVID-19, that of course has disrupted production throughout 2021. Throw in the fact that weather doesn't always cooperate and can cause issues. We know that maple syrup production is not an easy business to be in. Despite the challenges you have all faced, it's really inspiring to see you continue to step up, go to work, and make sure that Ontarians can enjoy this Canadian treasure. I know it hasn't been easy, so I want to thank you for not giving up, for continuing to overcome the challenges that you've had to face. One of the ways you continue to drive the demand for maple syrup and maple syrup products is through marketing. By identifying consumer demands and market trends, your organization will be able to identify growth opportunities for the maple products sector. That's why I'm pleased to announce that the Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association will receive up to $83,000 to develop a comprehensive maple product sector strategy for growth and opportunity. That strategy will begin by assessing the current market and establishing baseline data that will lead to broad broad stakeholder engagement to determine a shared vision for the future of the maple product industry. Once the data has been collected and baselines determined, the next step will be to create a strategy to grow Ontario's maple product sector. I look forward to the possibility of new products and new marketing opportunities that will come out of your strategic plan. I know that all of you work hard to get your products to market, and this strategic plan will be key to finding new opportunities that will benefit all of your members of the associations. To all of the over 600 sugar makers who each year are committed to producing a high quality product that Ontario can be proud of, thank you for allowing me to speak with you. I wish you much luck as you begin phase 1 of your strategy to bring Ontario maple syrup products to the world. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the faith that you've shown in the Ontario maple product sector by awarding the grassroots funding grant so that we can work together to build and grow our sector and ultimately all our individual businesses. I always like to add at this point that when someone told me I was too much of an entrepreneur to be a president, I thought I was the perfect person because we have 600 entrepreneurs out there that I have to look after. I would also like to offer thanks for the exceptional cooperation, insights, and service that we have received from the OMAFRA staff and at all levels of the organization. And Jenny Lou, I'd like to thank you for all the work that you have done for us. Maple's not at all. Finally, I would like to thank you for the service as an MPP and Parliament Secretary, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And at this time, I would like to show our appreciation both to yourself and the Honorable Lisa Thompson. And I'll ask Dan Seguin to speak at this point.
Bonjour. We would like to, on behalf of all OMSPA members, am I muted or am I on?
No, you're good.
All right. On behalf of all OMSPA members, we would like to thank you, Randy and Lisa, and all levels at OMAFRA for having an ear and out there to listen to all our concerns and to share all of our challenges and successes. As a gratitude, I would like to offer you, Randy and Lisa, a liter of champion syrup from the Royal Winter Fair from 2021.
Perfect.
De la part des acériculteurs de l'Ontario, nous voulons vous remercier d'être à l'écoute de nos défis et nos succès. Merci beaucoup, Randy et Lisa, et toute votre équipe à OMAFRA pour tout ce que vous faites pour nous. On veut vous remercier en vous donnant 1 litre de notre sirop qui a été champion à la Foire agricole royale à Toronto cette année en 2021. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Dan, for all that. And thank you, Mr. Pettipies, for all the hard work that you've done. And we hope in the years to come that we will be seeing each other more often.
Well, I hope so, but I'm retiring this year.
You know, in the private sector, you might be able to do more for us.
Anyway, I sometimes travel to North Gower to look up our relatives' histories. And so maybe if I get down that way, we'll bump into each other anyway. So
Will do. Will do.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you very much. Thank you for the announcement. And John, I'll hand this over back to you.
Thanks, Frank. Now we have Randall Goodfell, the head of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee, and he has an update on the Strategic Plan and Sector Development Project.
Yes, thank you very much. You'll get your fresh update, Randy, as to where we are and how we're proceeding with what we plan to proceed on with the funding from OMAFRA. So John, you can bring it up on the screen. That would be greatly appreciated. So we're actually doing 2 things. One is a sector development strategy for Ontario writ large, as well at the same time, what is our role within that future? meaning what is the strategic plan for OMSPA for the period of 2023 to 2028. John? So we have 3 phases, and the first phase is the background information gathering. And since the point in time where OMAFRA said we could start to proceed, which was October 1 until to date, we've been in phase 1, and we'll carry on for another couple months in phase 1. The phase 2 is when we meet with members and other stakeholders. And then ultimately we'll put phase 1 and phase 2 together and come up with the draft strategies that we'll have people commenting on. I'll go into a bit more detail when we come to each individual phase with a bit more discussion. So John, next slide, please. So again, between October 1st of last year and April 30th of this upcoming year, we have formed 10 working groups, and they've been predominantly OMSPA members with a few invited subject matter experts. And we'd like to also, Jenny's got some recognition this evening for her contributions. So we should also give some to Steve Duff, who's the chief economist for OMAFRA. He's helped us with data and working on the cost of production studies as well that we're doing. And the working groups were formed based upon, of course, our constitution, what it's called for us to do in our constitution, and then building off of our 2 previous strategic plans, the 2013 to 18 period and the 18 to 23 period. So nothing that we're doing is unexpected. It's what an organization should do. The difference between what we're doing now and what we did in the 2 periods previous, the 5-year period of 13 to 18 and 18 to 23, is that we're going much deeper and really involving members in pulling out the information and doing the analysis, the calculations, the exploration of stuff. So we'll have, and what we're doing in the process of that is developing a lot of and identifying a lot of really good talent among our members. And I think we're identifying a lot of our future leadership in the process of doing that. So John, next slide, please. So we had launched 6 working groups prior to Christmas. We activated them. They are the data needs for the Ontario maple sector. I would say we're no better or no worse than other maple sectors. We have not enough data. We have very little data, and your chief economist would confirm that, Randy, that we need better data. When I talk to people in the States, their data is all skewed as well. They're not, this sector doesn't seem to have good data for managing it, whether it's developing communications tools, whether it's developing public policy or whatever. That group is reporting just now. You will see the report in the next couple of days. The cost of production is another one. We've created a model and a tool for our members. I think you'll find it much more useful than any other tool you've seen. That one is also will be out in the next couple of days. Climate change impacts on our sector. We'll actually hear more about that this evening a bit later. And that one's already completed and will be out after this meeting. The one related to SCAN is like what's happening in other maple organizations in other parts of the world. Well, the ones that they're near us anyways. And also what other farm commodity groups are doing. That one is completed from a writing perspective. It just needs to be vetted a little bit more, but will be out within the week. The group, the Applied Research and Training Needs group, has sent out a survey earlier to find what members need for training and what ideas they have on research, and is now currently writing what we refer to as a concept paper for a Applied Research and Training Center. And that's a virtual one, and you'll hear more about that. It's basically making sure that we identify the needs of training and research and help find the supply to meet those needs. And we are deep into the surveying of current and past members and developing strategies to engage the next generation. There was just yesterday, I believe it was, our survey went out to our members, And I want to make sure and I was told, make sure you say this loud and clear. Please fill that out. It's not hard to do. We put a lot of effort into making sure that it was easy to do. Run it past a lot of producers to make sure everything was clear. And please feed that back to us. Next slide there. And as I say, these working groups have between 4 and 8 people each. So that's how we end up with 6 groups, 10 groups by 6 people. And that's 60 people engaged. There is a group that's been commissioned on ensuring quality, which of course includes food safety at the same time. We're looking at what's happening in other jurisdictions and looking at what's happening in other farm commodity groups in Ontario and outside of Ontario as well, and seeing what we need to do. We're looking at that as potentially one of our product differentiators from stuff from other places such as Quebec. Because if we're going to be able to maintain a premium price for our product, we're going to have to demonstrate that's the case. The other group that's been launched is Accessing Trees for the Future. So we're looking at various tenures of land, such as Crown land, First Nations land, Conservation Authority land, etc., to be able to see how those trees can be accessed in the case of First Nations in partnership with First Nations or by First Nations groups themselves who want to look at that as an economic development opportunity. We are bearing down heavily on product differentiation and market development, which of course connects really closely with the ensuring quality as our market and product differentiator. And then ultimately we will pull this together and look at all the items that pertain to the financial sustainability and the effectiveness of our organization. Heading into phase 2. Next slide, John. So before phase 2 starts in February, but we're also doing sort of the end work of getting phase 1 information out. So the beginning in mid-February, we will have these webinars, which will be given by the working groups to explain things like how to use the cost of production model, what's in it, etc. And then looking at the data that we have and how it could be create a market advantage for Ontario and where we're getting the information from. We've also developed strategies to be rolled out over the next number of years of the type of information we need to collect to really manage our sector better. There will be something out shortly as well as to the what other organizations in other states and provinces are doing, so we know where we stand. Following each of these seminars or these webinars, a video recording will be released. You can participate in it on the evening, but a video recording will be on the OMSPA website, and then we'll be open for members to review it and ask questions of clarification. It's not sort of at this point debating stuff. There's really, in what the work we've done is background information. It's like, oh, I don't quite understand how you gathered that information or made this comparison. That will be open to what we'll be doing from mid-February on. And as the balance of the working groups report, the next 5, we will have the same process. Have a webinar, have people participate in it, make sure the video of that webinar gets up onto the website, look at the questions that are coming in, the questions of clarification. So let's then launch into phase 2. John, there we go. Phase 2 are meetings with members and other stakeholders. And why we say other stakeholders, at the moment, our members are producers who predominantly, but also producers who have some balling capabilities or pancake houses. But there's other folks as well that we want to engage in this, such as the economic development people in rural areas, some of the community futures groups, understanding how they can contribute to our sector from a funding perspective or a promotion perspective or whatever, get their inputs as well. And so we will have at those sessions a facilitated discussion about the future of our sector and of OMSPA itself, based upon future looking scenarios. You know, what's likely to happen down the period of time from now on a number of fronts, and what we need to do to be prepared for that. And so these types of meetings will begin just after sugaring season. And it could be very, very late, April, and maybe just May. Looks like we're starting late this year in sugaring, so who knows, but it's sort of around that period of time. So a report based upon these 3 meetings will be prepared and put on the OMSPA's website for members to review and to provide comments on it. So in addition to those who are able to participate in these meetings, we hope to do as many as possible in person, but we are totally prepared to do hybrid meetings if that's allowed, or do it all online if circumstances are not favorable for getting together. But the thing is that there's plenty of opportunities. Phase 1, there was opportunities of the 60 people to input and do deep study. Here's opportunities for members to participate in phase 2 and you know, at the meetings or as well online, and also review the outcomes of what's been developed there. Phase 3, John, is putting it all together, which is taking phase 1 and phase 2, preparing our strategic, a draft of the sector development strategy and the strategic plan, set basically any time from June on. And we'll put that out in a draft form, where we're heading. We'll get some invitation we'll ask for written invitations. We'll invite written submissions, from members and other stakeholders. We'll incorporate that. We'll take the documents out further for further discussion based upon these drafts with our membership. And then the ultimate objective here is to finalize the documents that people will feel comfortable to approve by December 2022. And we have a contract with OMAFRA to deliver along those timelines. So just letting you know, these are coming down the pipe here. There's very much opportunity to participate. Next slide, So there is still time for our members to participate in 4 of the working groups. There is still time to participate in the Ensuring Quality working group, and that's Brian Bainborough, who is leading that one, along with Stephen Moore. There's one that relates to accessing trees for the future, again, on those various different tenures of land. Oh yeah, the last one I forgot to mention was on private land held by forestry companies. Brody Berrigan is leading that one. And then there's a product differentiation and market development group, which is led by Leanne Thompson. And then there's the financial sustainability and effectiveness of OMSPA group, which is led by myself, because it's significantly a governance issue that's being looked at in that group. So there's still opportunity to participate in phase 1 if that's where you want to do it. If you want to participate there, and in phase 2, phase 3, there's plenty of opportunities to participate. I believe the last slide there, John. Thank you. Questions? Geez, what thunderous noise I'm hearing.
It was so thorough, Randall, that there are no questions.
You can ask them of me later as well. This PowerPoint presentation will be up on the OMSPA website as well.
It's David Wagner here. When are we as members going to have a chance to vote on this? Like, it was told that members get to vote.
That is after everybody's done their work. It's in phase 3. It was indicated there, something that members can approve.
That be November, December, in that time frame, Randall?
Yeah. I mean, there'd be input pieces along the way where things can be, sharpened, redirected, etc. but ultimately the objective is get it to a point in that period of time in the last few months of 2022 where people say, I understand what's in front of me now, and I can make my mind up about it at that point.
If I can, David, it's Ray Bonenberg. If I can try to be helpful here. Normally, because I led the previous 2 strategic planning exercises from a facilitation point of view, we would work hard to get a consensus-based approach to the contents and the intent of the document and the follow-up, obviously, from it. So, you know, we involved people, and you may have been involved or commented at the time. And it's a collection of the comments and feedback from members as best we can that makes the document whole, right? So there's that old expression that we're stronger when we have the sum of the parts, like the whole parts. So it isn't so much that it's it's like a regulation that, forgive me, Randy, a regulation in Parliament or government where you vote for or against it. It's generally a more consensus-based approach and a participative approach. And this process is so involved, and previous processes have been involved where members can get involved. Remember the previous strategic plans, we did a survey and we got comments and we collated those comments together. So I personally don't, and I can't speak for Randall or the president, I don't think that what the process is meant to do is like a plebiscite or a regulation where you vote for it against it. It's generally a consensus based, and as you know, not everybody's going to get everything that they think should be included into the strategy or the plan. So that's all I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray, for that clarification. I think, John, there's a question there from Kayla McKenzie.
Yes, Kayla asked whether we would provide contact information for all the working groups. And Paul provided his for the climate change. And I also said, if you contact me at the office, admin@ontariomaple.com or call, I can also forward you to the right people too. So.
Yeah, the working groups had a title. They had sort of a draft mandate, and the call went out to everybody who wanted to participate to sign up for one. And the first thing that the group did was to make sure that they felt comfortable with the mandate, and then started the work after that. So there's something that's just reporting now and the report's finished, a little late to get involved with that one at this stage. You can comment on it, etc. But there are some that still are very much open for additional people to roll up their sleeves and work on the working group.
Yeah, so again, if contact the head office, and we'll put you right into to one of the working groups that Randall has left.
Yeah, and Jules also had a suggestion. We could put that contact information on OMSPA.ca. And a lot of this information, as we move forward, there'll be a whole section on this on the website. So
thank you very much, Kayla. Well, thank you very much, Randall. That's very good, and we're proceeding on schedule. The enthusiasm that in each one of these working groups, some of them I leave with enthusiasm and pride of the hard work that the volunteers are putting into this. They are developing the industry for the future, and they are working hard to get the best information possible for all the members. And the nice thing I like to see is, like Randall had mentioned earlier, is that the younger generation who have stepped in and who will be the leaders to replace all these white-haired guys. Well, some of them have no hair, but I mean,
Careful.
And So yes, it's good to see that. So it's really, really good to see that. So that's all I really have to say. And I just want to say, Randall, thanks again.
You're welcome.
And back to you, John.
Yes, Randall has put a huge amount of work into all of this. Wouldn't be going without him.
And I hadn't even bought him a beer yet.
Yeah.
Red wine.
Red wine.
Yeah. Now we're actually running pretty much on time, which is quite amazing. And I'd like to turn it over to Jenny Liu, and she has a presentation for us tonight as well. Welcome, Jenny.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny, as John just mentioned, and I'm OMAFRA's Maple Tree Nut and Agroforestry Specialist. It's funny because 3 days ago at another AGM, I mentioned that all the tree nut jokes had been made. So of course the result was that the first 15 minutes of this meeting was just open season on my title. So thanks for that. Yeah. I think I've been lucky enough to meet most of you, at least virtually. But for those that I haven't met, my role at OMAFRA as the Maple Tree Nut and Agroforestry Specialist is to provide production support from tapping to bottling. Generally speaking, in this very experienced industry, it's usually for new producers, but I actually got a call the other day from a gentleman who'd been producing maple syrup for 70 years, but who wasn't sure if he should be tapping before the first sap flow. I tried to also provide support with forest health, with pest updates, and I also do a lot of work internally within OMAFRA, bringing the industry's concerns and perspective to our policymaking and to crafting research and funding priorities. Tonight, though, aside from all that, my presentation is actually going to be a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I'll be speaking on food safety requirements. And of course, our food safety folks are the experts on this, but I'm just going to deliver the information as best I understand it on this very important topic. And welcome any questions. Can't guarantee I can answer them, but please feel free to contact me after or contact them. So, food safety requirements for maple syrup in Ontario. To give you a quick overview of what we'll be covering, I'm going to give a quick explanation of Ontario Reg 119.11, which covers produce, honey, and maple products, and then we'll dive into the relevant food safety components of this regulation, including food safety requirements, premise and equipment requirements, lead contamination, compliance tools, and how to get in touch if you want more information. So Ontario Regulation 119.11 applies to any person who packs or labels or transports or advertises or sells maple products in Ontario, and who also doesn't operate under a federal license. So this means that according to OMAFRA, the size of your operation is not a factor if you're going to be selling maple syrup. You could have 1 tap or you could have 100,000 taps. It doesn't matter. All of this applies to you. The exception to this is facilities who are CFIA certified, and those are federally regulated instead of provincially regulated. This regulation also applies to maple products that are imported from outside of Ontario and then packed or repacked in Ontario, again, in a non-federally licensed establishment. So today we're going to focus on maple syrup in retail containers only. If you want more information on requirements for other maple products or bulk syrup or maple substitutes, feel free to contact me afterwards. So we can get into some specifics. Section 4 of OREG 119.11 prohibits the selling or packing or transportation of contaminated maple syrup. Now, the word contamination is extremely broad. Basically, it means you can't sell a product that's been treated or exposed to excess levels of radiation, or if it's been exposed to a hazard. A hazard is a biological or chemical or physical agent that causes the maple syrup to be unsafe for human consumption if it's not controlled. That means that your maple syrup can't have chunks of glass in it. It shouldn't have leaves in it. OMAFRA typically will test only for contaminants that are common or that are usually linked to a specific product. So for example, in maple, we only test for lead contamination. Having said that, other contaminants are prohibited even if we don't test for them. I should also mention, of course, it is prohibited to also mix good maple syrup with contaminated maple syrup. So in terms of premises and equipment requirements, your premises and your equipment, they have to be clean, they have to be sanitary. There are lots of good maple syrup guidebooks for more information about cleaning and sanitation. And every single surface that the maple syrup touches has to also be food grade. Now, material that is considered food grade, it is considered food grade when it does not contaminate food with harmful substances or change the food's taste or smell, how it looks, how it feels when it's in direct contact with the food. This includes anything that touches the maple syrup. So equipment, utensils, containers, surfaces and materials used during the collection, production, storage, packing, and transport of maple syrup or sap. So it can be a lot of things. So here are some examples of food grade versus non-food grade materials. On the left, we have non-food grade materials, and these, again, can't be used in collection, production, or storage of maple products. They include turnip plate coatings, lead solder, non-food grade plastic, galvanized steel, mild carbon steel, brass, bronze, copper, wood. If someone has time, they can make a song out of that, make it easier to remember. And some examples of food grade materials include, but again, aren't limited to, stainless steel, plastic that's recognized as food grade by a government agency such as Health Canada or the CFIA, aluminum alloy, certain series of aluminum alloy, glass, filter fabric, RO systems, plastic piping, and potable water plastic tubing. And all of these need to meet certain standards. And I'm sure this won't be the first time any of you are hearing this, but lead contamination is, of course, a serious issue. So lead is a naturally occurring element that is known to be a human health hazard. Chronic lead exposure can increase the risk of kidney damage, nerve damage, and infertility. And children in particular are quite vulnerable to lead poisoning. So maple products that are produced using lead-bearing equipment can become contaminated. And again, it's crucial to be using food-grade materials to avoid that. Lead sources can be found on all kinds of equipment in unexpected and expected places, including equipment or materials that have lead soldering. These include evaporator pans, galvanized collection tanks, bronze gear pumps. Lots of people don't know that lead is in bronze. Lead soldered pans, sap buckets, sap tanks, sap storage containers. All of those could have lead, and it is your responsibility to keep those out of your maple production system. So it's actually very simple for you to check your own equipment for lead. OMAFRA offers free lead test kits, as you can see on the left here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, I hope you can. But each of these small sticks here contains a chemical that changes color when it comes into contact with lead. And to use one of these sticks is really simple. You just pick a surface that you want to test. And it should be a surface that comes into contact with maple syrup if that's what you're testing for. So a soldered seam is a good example. Then you would prepare the surface by following, there's really good instructions in each test kit, but you prepare the surface by first cleaning it off. You take off any residual sap or syrup, take off any rust, dust, anything else by just wiping it off with water with a clean cloth. Then you rough up the surface a little with something like sandpaper, a knife, maybe an emery board for nails, and that roughing, what it does, it exposes any existing lead particles so that they can make contact with the testing chemical. Then you would activate the chemical, and then you rub the stick all over the surface of your the surface that you want to test. And if the solution changes color, then that means that lead is present in the equipment. If it doesn't, then you're good. An easy way to remember this is to remember red equals lead. So all lead bearing equipment has to immediately be removed from your maple production system. The ministry uses a progressive compliance approach to regulatory enforcement, and failure to comply with food safety requirements could result in compliance action by OMAFRA's Food Safety Inspection Delivery Branch. So our compliance tools include education, warning letters, compliance orders, product detention, and finally product seizure. OMAFRA will assess the risk posed by the non-compliance action, as well as the client's compliance history. And then OMAFRA would decide which compliance tool is appropriate for the situation. If the level of food safety risk is quite high, or for example, if the non-compliance is severe, then OMAFRA might notify other regulatory authorities like the CFIA or the Ministry of Health. When it's appropriate, non-compliance issues are turned over to OMAFRA's regulatory compliance unit, which may result in either tickets being issued or charges being laid. If you want more information on any of this, I would urge you to read through OMAFRA's Foods of Plant Origin website or email me, or feel free to email the inspection programs unit directly. I would just route you through to them anyway. So feel free to take any of this information down. Another thing that our inspections program unit covers is labeling. So in OREG 11911, there's a pretty extensive section on labeling, just to ensure that quality standards are sort of being upheld equally across the province. If you want to double check if your label on your products are following all regulation, you're more than welcome to submit your label to the inspections program unit for a free review. One last thing to mention is that if you do visit our website, our web pages are currently being migrated. So if you have any issues accessing this, just contact them directly. And that's all for me. If you have any questions, I would be glad to try to answer them.
If I may, Mr. Chair, it's Ray, Jenny, and I see Holly's on. We, as an organization, support random testing to determine lead, if there's any lead in the products. And we understand that the OMAFRA views maple as a less risk food. And we understand that, basis on eggs, milk, and meat, and things like that. However, there's a value to having a monitoring program that assures us that there's progress made to reduce lead in the equipment and hence in maple syrup in Ontario. We understand the restrictions of staff and cost and all that sort of stuff. We understand that. We don't want to be on the front page of the B section of the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, or the Ottawa Citizen, or the London Free Press that has, a lead outbreak or a lead issue. And we don't believe, respectfully, that it's all that expensive for OMAFRA to carry out some type of continued lead monitoring program, which we understand has been dropped. And we understand why. We don't agree that it should be dropped, and that it gives us comfort. And I know that clients, customers, consumers that come to me understand about the lead-based issue in food. And we just went through a long process of CalProp 65 internationally, of a very long expensive legal agreement with the state of California on reducing lead in maple syrup, which cost close to $500,000 for the industry to combat and develop compliance guidelines. And so we think we would like to ask that Ontario look at and review and reassess that approach, that it would behoove all of us to have some type of defense of people say, and I'll conclude by suggesting that you may know this, that there's a lot of new producers. They may be small coming into the market. They get farmers markets and they have gardens and they're going to sell maple syrup. They generally don't belong to OMSPA. They have substandard equipment, respectfully. I've been to a lot of them just because I'm out and about, to say in East Coast. And it still concerns us that we've got, we think we've crossed over into the new divide and that we don't have to worry about that anymore. I question whether that's valid. You don't need to respond. Love it if you or Holly could, but if I understand you're not the regulatory side of OMAFRA. I understand that. However, in your discussions with your colleagues, it may be a good idea to have, let's think about and talk about some type of program that's defensible, continuing on from what happened with when John Henderson and Paul Bailey and that section was involved, to give us comfort that we're making progress, because it's not perfect. I'll shut up.
Thank you very much, Ray, for that. Holly?
Oh,
Thank you,
thanks.
Holly.
I'm not sure I'm going to have anything to really that's substantial to respond, but no, I hear you, Ray, and it's something certainly we can take back. And I think there's been a lot in terms of our capacity, as you know.
Yes,
And,
understand.
and I think there are lots of challenges, and there's also been some other situations in terms of where other reasons we've lost capacity for food safety for maple. But certainly, like I said, we can take it back. And I know certainly Jenny's been doing her part in terms of advocating and, doing what she can to get some resources out there. But yeah, let me take that back, and certainly we'll have some discussions. And, let's, feel free to reach out to us and reach out to me, and we can continue that conversation.
Appreciate that. And normally, as you know, commodity groups or industry would push back on any government regulation that says there's control under food safety. We're not there. We understand that any type of negative publicity on contamination of maple syrup would be extremely harmful to our credibility, our reputation, our brand. And we get it. It. And so we're not a reluctant partner here as an industry, as a commodity group, to say, stay away from us. We're not that way.
Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. So yeah, let's continue to talk about that.
If I can add to that, Holly, is that this subject has come up in a few of the working groups already. And ideas have been flowing back and forth. And I think at the end of all this work, we would like to sit down with the OMAFRA and bring forward some ideas that make the job easier for you. And at this point, I can't say too much because the working groups are still working on it, and they'll come out with the ideas at the end of this process. But the number of ideas have come forward, and I think we can team up and work together on this.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay.
Thank you, Holly.
Thanks, Frank.
Jenny, there was a guidance book that was produced in about 2016 on how to adhere. Where Frank's got it, he's holding it up there.
It's not coming in very clear.
Yeah, it's not a face, so it's blurring it.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if OMAFRA has any more copies of that, because it's excellent on explaining, how to execute the regulation in real life.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
Can you send me a photo of that, Frank? Or
there it is.
There it is.
Right.
So that was primarily written by Paul Bailey when he was in the regulatory side, with input from Brian Bainborough, myself. There was about 5 of us over the Christmas season that put this as an excellent guide to interpreting the regulation. And we should have that. Yes, you can get it electronically somewhere, but oh my God, and we have so many new entrants because of COVID, primarily. We've got a huge amount of new entrants that never heard of the regulation or that OMAFRA as, you know, a regulatory role. They think maybe OMSPA has a regulatory role, and we don't. We don't. That's not our role. Do we input and provide advice and educate? Sure. So there's the document. It's a cat's meow.
Yeah, maybe even if, as a start, even if we can get an electronic version to you know, post up.
Well,
Yeah.
I
And
have one.
actually-
I have one of these at my sugar shack, and I have one here in my office. And I still, even all the years, I still refer back to it. And it would be great to send one of those automatically with our best practice manual to all new members. And
And
maybe
there was,
probably some of our old members could you probably use it.
Yeah, then there was French versions of that too. So that's what exactly Jenny, I was asking the seminars that we could have, because when Paul wrote those, he went across the province and he was holding seminars, and these were very successful. The one in Eastern, I believe we had like 30 or 35 people there.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely that book is golden.
Yeah, we can look into that. See what we can do in terms of, I don't know if there's a PDF of it or not.
Oh, well, sure there is.
There's got to be somewhere, but
It's got to be somewhere. Jenny,
Yeah.
if you check Todd's old files, it should be there.
If you ask Paul, he's on.
We might
it.
have to shake Paul down for one, yeah.
Yeah. May cost you.
Paul, of course, is on one of the working groups. So anyways, he's mentioned that a few times.
I think just to quickly and then I'll shut up. I think it's an excellent example of government and the commodity group working together to provide the extension and the information in plain language for people to comprehend and understand and follow. I think it was a great exercise, and it was it's valuable. So something to hang your hat on, and to we should still, you know, it's not outdated, and we should flaunt it.
And that actually Paul is on tonight, so maybe he can comment where the file is.
Well, I don't know. Well, he's retired, so he's not going to, he doesn't know where it is, but I'll let Paul talk.
Yeah, we'll do that offline, or unless Paul wants to talk.
That's good.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a published thing, so I'll definitely send some.
Wow. And we
We'll
had
have to get you a
thousands of copies. We collectively, and I know some of the locals printed other copies of it. So there's thousands of copies out there, but we got new entrants and they're not aware of it. And so we need to continually educate, right?
Definitely.
I may have an extra copy I can send you, Jenny.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'll ask internally first and see where that's at, and then if I can't find it, I'll get in touch with you. Thank you. I think there were some questions in the chat as well. Martin had a question asking if there are lead-free bronze gear pumps available from equipment suppliers. I don't know if any equipment suppliers want to take that. I'm assuming the answer is yes. I don't think any equipment suppliers now are producing anything with lead in it, but
yes, there are, and there's stainless steel gears in your gear pumps now, Jenny.
okay. Thank you, Clancy. Great. Paul had a question, curious that copper is approved for potable water pipes, but not for maple syrup. Good question, Paul. I will take that back to our food safety folks. I'll CC you in an email, and we'll get to the bottom of that.
Actually, Terry replied to me offline indicating that sap is acidic and water is not, which accounts for the difference. So thank you, Terry.
Great. Learn something new every day. Thanks, Terry. Bill just had a comment that we're far ahead of other jurisdictions on this issue. I'm actually not too sure where other jurisdictions are, but I know that food safety definitely at OMSPA, it's something, or definitely at OMAFRA, it's something that we stand behind. It's something that we want to push. 100% is the goal, right? So, but yeah, it's good. It's really encouraging to see everybody on this call who are totally behind, this type of regulation and working together to get better food safety out into the industry. So, and then I think Terry had a question.
That's not pertaining to food safety.
Mhm. And Paul said he just texted the FPO people, lead testing will continue as will label compliance. Yeah, so yeah, I was gonna comment on that too, Ray. I'm not sure what the extent of the lead testing program was before, but now basically, I guess I should have included a slide on this, but we've got a maple syrup monitoring program. And every year what happens is the samples of Ontario maple syrup are collected from across the province. There's a set number of samples every year. They're collected randomly and then they are analyzed. So the labels are reviewed by ministry staff to determine the compliance with our labeling requirements. And then they submit samples of these maple syrup to University of Guelph Agriculture and Food Lab, and they analyze it for lead, they analyze it for bricks, and they analyze it for color, right? So for grade. So then that's how they do determine. That's how they find, you know, people who are still non-compliant. And so the lead is still is still.
We used to get a report on that through. I know we haven't been able to, you know, adequately get together and talk about that. Labeling, you know, is, to me, I could get a label fall off because the store has a hot environment and it falls off and I'd get in trouble. I'm more interested in the lead content from a consumer point of view. If it doesn't have the proper grade, you know, it's the amber grade drops off, well, so be it. But if it's lead based, it's got lead content, sorry, that's more serious. So I understand there's monitoring of labeling. From a overall risk point of view, that's not as important, I think, to the industry as the lead issue.
Yeah, it's done in the same go to the same sample.
I understand.
And there
but
are
in a rank of importance, we would want the lead one to be number one.
Right, for sure. So there are actually stats available on the OMAFRA website. I'll find it in a second here and I'll put it into the chat. I think it hasn't been updated in the last couple of years because there have been issues getting out with COVID. I see Paul is adding some comments in the chat as well. But yeah, so 50 lead samples were done in 2022. They didn't do color testing this year, but I think it's up to date up to 2019. It shows the number of non-compliance records they had for certain concentrations of lead. They're like 2 different concentrations of lead, and then they've sort of bucketed out like this many producers had this much parts per billion, and then this many producers had this much parts per billion. So yeah, I'll put that into the chat later. And definitely anybody anybody who takes part in the maple syrup monitoring program who gets their samples analyzed, they also get a full all of their information so they can make the appropriate changes.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jenny, I see that Cornelia Danis has got a comment there, and I think she has a great idea that the new Boiling It Down with Steve Needham chat will be a great vehicle to promote some of this food safety through. For all the new entries in the industry. So it's something maybe you and Steve Needham can work on.
There's another Facebook group that I know of. I think it's called Backyard Maple Syrup Makers or something like that, but it's very active. There are 3,000 people from all across like the eastern seaboard of the States and Quebec and Ontario, and yeah, pretty frequently you see some questionable things pop up.
Well, and the questions frighten me.
Yeah.
Just the very absence of knowledge in the questions scare me. So, yep.
Right. Somewhere to go to if you don't want to sleep at night, I guess. Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much, Jenny.
Yeah,
and I put your email in the chat earlier, so if people need to contact you, they know where to find you. And there's lots more to carry on with this discussion, that's for sure. And we'll look for that that guide and get it organized. Now we have Paul Renaud, who has been instrumental in our climate change group. He's been studying this for a long time in his own operation. And he has a portion of the findings of their group to present tonight. And Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Here, I'm working on sharing the screen here, so just give me a second. I'm not as adept as some of you folks here. There we go. If everybody can hear me, at least one person nod, and if you can see the screen, please.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Au commencement, je veux dire que tous les renseignements sur carbone neutre que je veux partager aujourd'hui sont disponibles sur mon website en français. Le website, c'est espritdanslaforêt.ca. So everything I'm going to speak of tonight is available in French on my website. I will also translate this particular deck and put it up there as well in French for anybody who would like to read it in a different language. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll hit them at the end. And although I'm the person presenting the results, I'd like to acknowledge the important contributions made in the climate change working group by the other members, particularly Jenny Liu and Brody Berrigan, who assisted greatly in the production of this report. So the first part I'm going to speak about is what we found in the scientific literature regarding climate. And I want to emphasize that in assessing these results, we were very careful to include only the results where there is significant agreement amongst researchers and by multiple researchers. So we explicitly excluded any preliminary findings where further research is still ongoing or needed to be clarified and so on, so that what you see here, you can pretty much see that there is no debate on. So we will update this moving forward, perhaps as more research comes forward, but at least what you see here, there is absolutely no debate of in the scientific community. So if we look at the climate effect on the sugar bush, we're going to be seeing longer, hotter summers, which is good for tree growth, right? So it's not all bad. Trees love a longer growing season, right? But with that will also come increased likelihood for invasive insects, and we're seeing some effect of that already in Ontario. And that's likely to continue as climate change changes the habitat within which these pests can spread. We're also going to see through these hotter summers increased drought frequency and severity, which will hinder root growth and seedling mortality and so on. And we're also going to see more variable springs, and we've already started to feel that a little bit, but that's just going to continue, where we're going to see thaw and frost cycles and so on occurring where we didn't see them before. And this winter is perhaps a good example. We're seeing less snow cover than we did in previous years. So that will have more winter precipitation also falling as rain through freezing rain. And it can lead to fine root damage, which can inhibit growth of the trees. So this in turn will affect the maple season timing. We're going to see tapping season starting earlier and becoming more unpredictable. Figuring out when the last boil happens before you start seeing buddy sap is going to be trickier. We're going to see buddy sap happening earlier and more unpredictably. Shorter seasons and a shifting also in the season. And then secondly, in terms of happening sooner. And then all this is going to make it harder to, predict labor when we need help, right? So for those of us who employ labor in the sugar bush, right, that's going to be harder to time, right? So when do you bring your staff on? When do you lay them off and so on is going to become harder. From if we look at it over the long term, and by long term, I mean a cycle of, greater than 40 to 50 years, we're going to see less favorable growing conditions. And for sugar maple, particularly in the area south and west of the line drawn, say, between Orillia and Kingston as a rough guide, maybe Orillia and Perth, but roughly in that zone. They're going to have fewer days for favorable maple syrup production. The trees are going to struggle more young stock will struggle as it tries to, and it will take longer for existing trees to die off. That's the good news in this, is that Although we're going to have the habitat shift from maple northward, this will affect younger trees before it affects existing trees. So it may take a longer period before existing trees can no longer exist in southern Ontario. But unless we do something more radical in terms of combating climate change, it seems clear that this shift is going to occur over a very long period of time. Many of us are also experiencing higher costs for fuels through carbon taxes and so on. And consumers are increasingly becoming more concerned about carbon neutral products and their own personal carbon footprint. And if I had to find an analogy in the past, it would be sort of like the organic awakening that happened in the past when consumers decided, a large number of consumers at least decided that organic products were better than non-organic products. And it's possible that, and it's quite likely, I believe, that consumers will do the same for climate-friendly products. And if we look at surveys that were conducted recently, and there have been a number of these surveys, the largest being a survey of over 350 maple syrup producers across North America. They confirm pretty much what we're seeing in the science. Producers are seeing a reduction in quantity and quality also of the sap that only researchers are now just picking up on. So we didn't report on that on the previous slide because it's an area of ongoing research, but producers are already starting to be concerned on that point. So I'm mentioning it here because we're seeing it in these surveys. A third of the producers over the past couple of surveys indicated they had missed the start of the season because it happened sooner than they expected. They weren't geared up for it and so on. And that was quite costly. And more producers are expecting damage as a result of severe weather conditions, right? So as we get greater numbers of windstorms and ice storms, we're going to see more tree damage. And almost half of us believe that we're already seeing this. So it's pretty clear that these are all kind of negative effects on the industry that we need to be aware of. The good news is, I mean, that's a pretty bad news story, right? But the good news is that we can do some things today, right? So we can reduce our fuel consumption, carbon footprint, and costs by taking action in a number of areas, right? The biggest one is improving the heat management in your evaporator. That's our single largest source of emissions. And the more efficient we are, the more efficient the evaporator is. And the more things that we do to make it more efficient, right, has a direct relation to your reduced fuel consumption. And if you're on wood, you can literally cut the amount of wood that you use in half by making some simple changes to your evaporator, right? If you've already moved on and you're on a very efficient evaporator, the next step is to use RO to reduce the amount of sap that you need to boil. Now, most large producers are already taking advantage of this technology, right? But for the smaller guys and the new entrants, this is really important that we spread this information to them because it can make a big difference in the amount of fuel that you use. What's really interesting is that there's an emergence now of tools that we can use that are electric powered, whether they're utility vehicles that we use in the woods, chainsaws and so on, which help us reduce our secondary level of fuel use, right? So for example, personally, I've switched over to using electric chainsaws because the power that's available in these saws today is equal to what I was getting out of my pro level gas saws in the past. So, it's not a huge part of my fuel consumption, but it's a step forward. Obviously, finding and using suppliers and shippers that have lower carbon emissions also contributes to this, right? So we can take action personally at this level. And if we look at the other side of the ledger, which is not just emitting carbon, but the reality is our trees are amazing sources for carbon sequestration. And when I use the term sequestration, if you're not familiar with that term, it means the carbon that is absorbed by the trees. Our trees are amazing sinks for carbon dioxide. They just eat it up, right? A maple tree can actually, by the time we get around to tapping, it has already absorbed a ton of carbon dioxide in it. So if we implement best practices for sugar bush management, right, we can encourage that even more sequestration of carbon by those trees, as well as promote biodiversity in the forest, which helps protect against wind damage and invasive species. So these are important actions that we can take to protect our sugar bushes as the as the climate becomes increasingly hostile to them. You know, if you're using wood for your fuel, you can consider using harvesting only dead, diseased, or down trees for firewood, or trees that you've needed to thin in order to implement sugar bush management practices, which allows your healthy trees to grow bigger and sequester more carbon. So that's another simple thing that people can do. And if you're on other fuels, still by thinning your trees and by encouraging the larger trees to grow bigger, you're going to sequester more carbon by increasing the net basal area in your forest. For those who are using pipelines, the more you improve your sanitation, the longer you can keep your tap holes open, and you can start tapping earlier. There are several producers I've met in the Lanark area, for example, that are tapping now, in fact, while the trees are still frozen, because they know that their tap holes will stay open longer and they will avoid missing the start of the season as a result. So that's another tip that people can do. There's a way, in fact, that maple syrup producers can actually take advantage of climate change here, because, you know, we're the only branch of agriculture, or one of the few anyway, let's put it that way, that doesn't kill its crop when it harvests it. And as a result, if you factor in the fact that, you know, our trees are sequestering carbon at an amazing rate, right? This is a huge, huge opportunity, I think, for us. And in fact, what I'm finding in the research I've been personally conducting is that most efficient producers of maple syrup are carbon neutral and don't know it. Or if they know it, they can't prove it. But what we're finding more and more is that the more efficient you are, the more likely you are to be carbon neutral as you produce your syrup. And I've already mentioned that a tappable tree consumes a lot of carbon. If you had, even if you're a small producer like me, right, with 100 taps, I'm in the 100 to 200 range. I broke 100 last year. You know, my little bush sequesters every year more than a ton of CO2. And these benefits scale up, right? I've been speaking with producers as high as 40,000 taps so far. And the sequestration that they have available to them is amazing. If you're at 50,000 taps, for example, you're sequestering in your sugar bush 1 million tons, that's a metric ton, which is heavier than a regular ton, of CO2 per year. So the amount that's in your bush is substantial, right? On the chart at the right, I've shown graphically, you know, 3 mythical producers whose sugar bushes are the same size. The first producer, who might not be carbon friendly, their emissions in producing the syrup are greater than the amount that's created by their sugar bush. Because if you have so many trees, you know, pick a number, say 100, 1,000, 40,000, doesn't matter what the number is, right? That times the number of trees is your carbon budget. And you can either be above that carbon budget, at your carbon budget, or below that carbon budget. And so in these 3 examples, the terminology I'm using is that if you're net zero, your carbon emissions every year are sequestered by your sugar bush. So I'm not greenwashing anything. I'm not talking about, you know, some wild story that, you know, I burn wood, so therefore I'm carbon neutral because trees are regenerated over a 200-year cycle. No, I'm talking about every year, if you control your emissions by being efficient, you are to less than the amount that's sequestered by your trees. Under the strictest rules for carbon accounting, you are either carbon neutral or potentially carbon negative. And what I've been finding in speaking with producers is that the bigger you are, the more likely you are to be carbon negative by a huge amount. So this is really quite an interesting finding. So if we look on the emission side in a little bit more detail, 90% of our emissions typically come from evaporating sap, right? We use heat to do that. We need fuel. We need to burn some kind of fuel, whether it's wood, oil, propane, it doesn't really matter, but we need to burn some kind of fuel to do that. And that, for the most part, what I'm seeing and speaking with maple syrup producers and what I've seen in my own operation, that's about 90% of my total emissions. RO, or reverse osmosis, is carbon friendly because it reduces the total amount of sap volume without using heat. So that's like free, right? So anybody who's on RO already has a massive leg up, right? Because they're just going to boil less, and that takes less heat and emits less carbon, right? The more electric power you use, that's fine. You know, if you're on pumps and other schemes that use a lot of electric power, that's okay, right? Electric power has carbon in it because Ontario Hydro does, in some of its power plants, right, burn fossil fuels and so on. But if you look at the total amount that's in a kilowatt, it's measured in grams, not kilograms. And if we compare to our evaporator, those emissions are in kilograms, right? So electric power is much lower emission. So if we're shifting to pipelines and systems and stuff like that, and using ROs that use electricity, that's great because we're more efficient in terms of our carbon emissions as a result. And in general, the more efficient your evaporator is, regardless of your fuel, the less carbon emissions you will have. So even if you're on wood and your evaporator is 50%, if you're also using an RO, that's reducing your sap that you won't need to boil by another 50%, right? That's a significant total reduction in your emissions. And so, I found this in my own operation. I've always been conscious about my own carbon footprint. So I modified my old 20-year-old evaporator from an efficiency level of 13% to over 80% by using heat management more effectively. And I've proven that even without an RO, if your evaporator is efficient enough, you can be carbon neutral. I've also benchmarked a producer that's at 7,500 taps that's using oil. And they use a RO at a relatively low level. And the levels I've actually spoken to in terms of a couple of people at this level range from 6 to 13 bricks output. And they are also carbon neutral. In fact, they're massively carbon negative. We're in the process of actually figuring out by how much, which is a more detailed calculation, but it's already evident that they're in the green by quite a range, right? And I've spoken to a 40,000 tap producer who's using oil, but their oil evaporator is over 90% efficient. And they're using RO at 35 bricks. And it's pretty clear already that they're carbon negative. So, this research is ongoing. I'm looking to, as we go into phase 2, the working group, we're looking to connect with more maple syrup producers who have different, levels of efficiency and types of fuel and so on. And I'm keen to calibrate and develop litmus tests for determining quickly if you're going to be carbon neutral or not. So for example, I can tell you already, because I've worked with a number of people with oil evaporators, that if you consume less liters of oil in your evaporator than the number of liters of maple syrup you produce, I guarantee you're going to be carbon neutral when you do the detailed calculations. You're already there. And what I'd like to do is figure out where those break-even points are for different types of producers on different kinds of fuel at different levels and so on. Because I believe strongly that if we can figure that out, we can probably prove that the vast majority of our industry is actually already carbon neutral and just doesn't know it. And I think that can have amazing advantages for the industry. It goes not just from bragging rights, but potentially we can even monetize this. So if you'd like to help by being a case study, please email me at Paul. My email is easy. It's paul@renaud.ca. And let me know if you'd like to be a case study and help me figure out a bit more precision on this information. So far in the number of dialogues I've had with different maple syrup producers of various sizes, I see 3 common themes that emerge as they consider the pluses and minuses of being carbon neutral or net zero, if you will. One is it's obviously good for the environment, right? So it's ethically responsible thing to do. It's something you can personally do and have bragging rights in doing as you, instead of waiting around for governments to get their act together and do something, right? You can actually do it now, right? And food for thought, right? Even though you might think, well, my little operation isn't going to move the yardsticks in terms of the global problem. The reality is, if every one of the 500,000 taps of maple syrup in Canada were carbon neutral, we would offset the emissions of the city of Winnipeg, or a city the size of Winnipeg, such as Quebec City, right? So it adds up. Right? The second reason where people find it interesting to be net zero is that it improves your efficiency. If you're not already efficient, this helps expose where you're not efficient. And unless you like cutting wood, right, or buying a lot of fuel at increasingly expensive prices, it's not a bad thing to do to lower your costs. And in general, this is true of sustainability in general, right? If you are running a sustainable business, you're running a low-cost business, you're running an efficient business. And if you're efficient today, great, why not take credit for it, right? And by being provably net zero. The third reason is greed. There's potential financial benefits for being net zero. There's certainly the potential for increased sales from increasingly conscious, climate conscious, consumers. An opportunity to differentiate your product in an otherwise crowded marketplace, and maple syrup is a commodity. We produce great maple syrup, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand the nuances of what good maple syrup is versus this cheap stuff they buy at Costco, right? So it's an opportunity to differentiate. And downstream, one of the areas that I've been working with the association on is the potential for monetizing this through carbon credits or maybe carbon tax breaks down the road. So it's possible as carbon taxes rise that the amount of carbon sequestered in your sugar bush could potentially make you more money than the syrup you sell. Wouldn't that be cool? So in closing, I want to maybe borrow a tagline from Saturday Night Live from those of you old enough to remember that show. Maple syrup is kind of like it is quite an amazing product. It's both a dessert topping and a floor wax, right? It's a great product, tastes great, but it's carbon friendly and maybe good for the environment too. Personally, I think it's really cool that we could be the first sector in agriculture, at least the food side of agriculture, to be provably carbon neutral. And I'm really keen to pursue this research for those of you who would like to help me do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting. Yeah, there's some questions in the comments there.
Okay, so I'll scroll through the chat here. Give me a second.
Paul, maybe it's Ray, the discussion we had last week, maybe talk about the Saskatchewan grain farmers quickly.
Yeah, so I don't want to raise people's expectations because we've yet to really engage government on this, but recently there was news that the federal government had granted grain farmers in Saskatchewan rebates on the carbon taxes because if they were using more efficient methods for drying their grain before sending it to market. So if they were using natural gas, for example, they were getting rebates than if they weren't using natural gas to dry the grain. So, I look at that and say, well, gosh, right? If they can get a rebate on their carbon taxes by being more energy efficient, why the heck can't we, right? And the only thing stopping us from doing that is just proving it, right? And actually, they don't even have to prove it and they're getting the rebate, right? So so I'm looking at this saying, wow, this is like a low-hanging fruit, right? And way easier than justifying carbon credits and selling carbon credits in a market and all that stuff, right? Is let's just document the fact that our industry is an amazingly efficient industry, and that our trees are a very valuable resource in the fight against climate change, and get rewarded for that.
One of the questions, Paul, is which department of government should we be looking to help lead us on the carbon credits? And I guess in Quebec, forest owners have been getting a credit like that for many years.
So in terms of carbon credits, there is no approved methodology for carbon credits for maple syrup. So they're nowhere in the world, right? So that's not an easy avenue. To apply for carbon credits as a maple syrup producer, we have to follow a methodology. That methodology has to be approved by various international agencies. There is no such methodology. So there's some heavy lifting required as an industry if we want to use the carbon credit route, right? In Quebec, organic producers, if you're an organic producer, there's a carbon neutral certification you can apply to. From what I've been able to tell, nobody's done that because the auditing costs are crazy for adhering to that. And quite frankly, I've looked at their methodology and it's not exactly rock solid. So I think there's room for differentiating our own product in terms of being carbon neutral. The accounting I've been doing is based on the internationally recognized standards for carbon accounting. You may have heard of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 in the news and so on. We take into account in our approach all 3 scopes, right, and compare it to the amount of sequestration in the sugar bushes based on science. So the approach we're pursuing is showing that we're carbon neutral every year because of the total of our 3 scopes is less than the amount sequestered in our sugar bushes. That is a rock solid approach that is, will stand up in court any day of the week. And nobody else is doing that yet. So this is an opportunity, I think, for us to push hard and to push hard. And honestly, I have no friggin' idea who in the government we need to engage with because, quite frankly, climate change is all over the map in the government. There's no evident, there's no apparent leader anywhere across on this file, right? It's really smeared across several departments. So I think it's going to take a full court press to figure that out.
Maybe Holly has a quick comment. I noticed you turned your video on.
I'm not going to disagree, Paul. I used to, before I came into this role, I actually managed the agri-food climate change unit at OMAFRA. So we were looking at developing offsets, developing methodologies for offsets. I'm not sure we were looking at maple, but and I think you've pointed out it's a pretty rigorous science, and but there's lots of, it can be done. We're not doing it now, as far as I know. But it's not to say we're not going to do it in the future. And I don't know, like, I really don't know what the approach will be. But, I think that, there's different avenues you can take, and I think you can do offsets privately. There's different ways to provide offsets. But I think it sounds like you've done your homework and there might not be anything available for your sector at this time, even like internationally and privately, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so in terms of the voluntary carbon credit market, they all follow different methodologies, and there is no methodology yet approved for maple syrup,
Okay. Yeah.
which would have to be based on energy efficiency. So, for example, we're different than forestry. There is an approved methodology for forestry, which is based on cutting trees less often. But realistically, in the maple syrup bush, we're not going to cut our maple trees, right? We may thin them, but that's not the route, right? The route is through energy efficiency. There are other sectors that are using other energy efficiency to generate carbon credits through a methodology, and so it's not beyond the pale to imagine that we could create said methodology and so on. But that's realistically a longer road. I think I think a faster route would be to recognize, and we need to do some proof as an industry, but I think we can get that quickly. But I think the faster route is to recognize that Canada has the world's first carbon neutral food product, right? And that has significant value for promoting Canadian agriculture and a whole bunch of related promotion of sustainability for food and Canadian food as exports. And, that is, we could be at the tip of the spear, if you will, for a government initiative. Right?
And there's interest, if I may, there's interest. It's Ray from the Ontario Woodlot Association. If any of you who are OWLA members, their most recent Woodlander issue devoted most of it to carbon and climate change and carbon issues. And Paul submitted an article in that. It was awesome, excellent article. And so I think there's partners, Holly, that are like-minded, that would work together to develop approaches potentially. And I remember in my days in the past that there was talk about some kind of a carbon a bank in Chicago, for example. It's kind of like a stock market type of situation where you bought and sold carbon credits. And, for companies that were carbon negative, wanted to buy credits from somebody who's carbon positive to be viewed as good to their shareholders. And I always thought that the maple industry would be poised, and we could do that through the IMSI, which would be work, but we could look at, the 17 states and 4 provinces that are maple producers and aggregate our impact in a positive way to carbon sequestration. It would be a monumental job maybe, but I think given where governments are in both countries, we would be on the right side of the angels, right? Well, like we would be viewed as a contributor to the solution, not the problem, because people come in to see us with the sugar house and bellowing out of the stack. I got a 22-inch stack and out it goes, and they're thinking, holy mackerel, what's happening here? So it would take work, but I think there's possibilities.
See, I was going to make 2 points, is that this is a reason why you need an association, because the type of work can't be done by one producer. And so that's what it's a significant point. That work needs to be done by association, but also that engagement with government and other agencies needs to be done by the association. Secondly, is that I know the people that Paul is working with, those sizable operations. He's not going to reveal who they are, I don't think, unless they've said, hey, it's so-and-so and the other person. But the thing is, you would all recognize the names of these people, and you would say, my gosh, if they're that interested in it, there must be something here. So just sort of there's credibility and vetting of this already by significant producers in our association.
Yeah, and I must acknowledge the fact I've been getting some great support by producers, and I'm looking to engage with more. So turning to some of the other questions here, which department I think we've touched on. In Ontario, I guess it would be OMAFRA. I'm not sure. But honestly, I'm not sure, period, right? The question to Quebec, Quebec forest owners, yes, there's the pivot program in Quebec. It was in fact the first carbon credit program for woodlot owners in Quebec. They're struggling because they started with like the Eastern Ontario Model Forest program that is running through Blue Source in Ontario. They've targeted community forests first. And again, the argument is they're going to cut trees less often, and that's the basis for sequestration, which doesn't apply to maple syrup. The other problem they have is that in both Ontario and Quebec, and I've spoken to the folks at EOMF, and is that, in order to get carbon credits, you have to commit to like a 40-year plan, right? And it's hard for private industry to commit to more than 10 years. Even 10 years is tough, right? So imagine 40. A lot could happen in 40 years. I'm certainly not going to be around in 40 years, right? My marriage is likely, but in the past, rarely survived 10 years. So between death, divorce, and taxes, who knows, right? What can happen? So it's a problem. I think a different methodology is necessary. And I think we can monetize this also differently. We don't have to rely on carbon credits to get there. And I think a basic recognition that we provide a valuable green service to the Canadian challenge of climate change and to get proper credit in terms of carbon taxes would be sufficient. That's my personal opinion. I'm happy to take a
carbon tax rebates. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, carbon tax rebates. Right?
Which means money in your pocket.
Yeah, money in your pocket faster. Right? So I think in terms of the other questions, there was a question about, is this happening in other Canadian ag industries? The answer is no. They don't have the advantages we do, right? If you're running an orchard, the amount of sequestration in your orchard relative to your production is a very different equation than in our sugar bushes, which are way more dense, bigger trees, etc. So can we be an example for other branches of agriculture to follow and to see how far they can get? Absolutely. And I think we can literally be a beacon for other branches of agriculture, whether it's honey and so, particularly the branches of agriculture where you don't destroy your crop when you harvest it. So orchards, honey, egg producers, dairy producers. Right. I don't think the dairy industry, for all the hits they've been taking over cow farts, have ever looked at the amount of carbon that's sequestered in their fields. Right now, does that offset the cow farts? I have no idea. Right. But I think documenting and raising the visibility of what maple syrup is doing could help those folks.
So Holly, this would be an ideal pilot project for you to talk to your director or ADM about, you know what, we got these maple guys that are pretty excited about this and think that we can not change the world, but we can be a net contributor to the carbon issue. And we're willing to do some work and talk to us about how you could support that so that we have a more robust analysis, not just respecting Paul's analysis, but a more robust, broader analysis about what this could mean to the broader environment and to carbon sequestration and contributing to climate change.
I think what Ray is saying is a partnership.
Wow, geez, Holly, you'd be a hero. Like, come on. And then,
well, I think I was going to say, I think you certainly you've got some a good project to build, that's building on Paul's work and Jenny's work and the work of the association around this. Certainly, we can have the conversation and look at what are some of the options. But I think, Paul, I think you've raised or underscored that this is not a simple science. And probably some work needs to be done. So certainly we can look at what needs to be done to build that case. And we are entering into our next policy framework, our 5-year provincial and federal agreement. So I think that this is an opportunity certainly to pay attention to that and look at where some of that program is going to go. There will be some stakeholder engagement on that, but I think that this is certainly an area that you want to emphasize as important for that next 5 years of programming.
Yeah, our contribution to the consultation on the next session of the agricultural policy framework, it was very heavily focused on adaptation to climate change, and we put that forward as a significant issue we wanted to work with the government on, both federally and provincially. So it's in our submission.
Oh, good. I do see certainly that issue kind of rising to the top in terms of some of certainly the issues that we need to be looking at in the next 5, 10 and more years.
And given the interest from COP26, and I don't think that the federal government in Canada or the provincial governments are able to ignore that. There's going to be requests for action, or at least dialogue and conversation about what can be a viable step. So Randall sums it up nicely, where we have said we want to be part of that consultation process on that policy development, and this is a great segue into that.
And I just wanted to add,
there's the iconic aspect of this as well. Let's not lose sight of the fact that maple syrup is the first agricultural product in Canada, right, along with corn.
Yeah.
And if you put that historical context in perspective, it's also the most probably widely associated agricultural product with Canada. And then thirdly, we are the lead in being the only branch of food that is carbon neutral or better. I mean, to me, that's a triple header in terms of the iconic marketing opportunity that accompanies this, right, internationally.
Think of it, Holly, in your role as a public bureaucrat, what a great success story for your politicians to get up on the stump and talk about this. It would be awesome, right? They would get votes coming out of their ears.
But also, I just
Ray's our new lobbyist, by the way.
yeah, I just want to have Paul and Ollie there, being close to the Quebec side and also part of Boise Est. I think they're a step ahead of OWA on that. So Blue Source is the engineering company for forest model right now. So they will calculate credit. And on the Quebec side, farmers have been getting carbon credits checks from the Quebec government for many years now. So this is long gone in the Quebec. It's been established, and so is the forest owners. So I think we're overdue to see something like this in the Ontario side. So anyway, just to help out on this, it's happened on the Quebec side, done and over with, and they're getting their money every year. Okay.
I'm going to step in
Quebec,
here and
Jules. That's Quebec.
No, Ray,
Yeah.
John.
I'm going to step in here and suggest this may be a good point to end it. It's been a very, very interesting conversation tonight on many different points. And this is only the beginning. We're going to have a lot more of this kind of information coming out and these kinds of discussions, hopefully, as we move through our whole process. Thank you to OMAFRA. So Frank, have you got any closing words you'd like to say?
I just want to thank everybody for being on tonight, for the questions that they've done. Holly, thank you for listening and making your comments. Jenny, thank you very much for your program also. And Paul, Renaud, thank you very much. And thanks for the people who was able to give bits and pieces for the bilingual language. As you see, we are trying to add more and more into our association through literature, through conversation, and thank you, Dan Sagan, for that lovely syrup. Did you say you were sending the bottle to me too? I'm not sure if I heard that in the conversation. But anyways, thank you, and we'll see you all tomorrow night. Take care.
Merci.
Thanks, everyone. If you need the link for tomorrow night, omspa.ca, and go into events and info days, and you can pop right in there. Even if you haven't registered before, if the meeting has started, you can come right in.
We have some great presenters tomorrow night. Please look them up. They were people that you've requested. So that's that I think you'll really appreciate it.
That's awesome.
And
thank you.
the thing I also wanted to highlight was that Paul's group was the first to report. You can see the depth that he went into. The other working groups are doing that same type of depth. So they're working on your behalf. Your fellow producers are working on your behalf to this type of depth. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
See.